The gunshot that tore through the silence of Pendleton, Oregon in 1879, marked the beginning of the end for Lillian Russell's life as she knew it. The heavy oak door of their modest homestead slammed open, revealing her father drunk again, his clothes disheveled, and his eyes wild with a mixture of triumph and terror. "I've done it, Lily. I've found us a way out." Charles Russell stumbled across the threshold, clutching a piece of paper like it was gold itself. Lillian looked up from the stew she was preparing, her 22-year-old shoulders already carrying the weight of a woman twice her age. Her mother's death 3 years prior had left her to care for her father, whose grief had quickly transformed into a gambling addiction that consumed what little they had. "What have you done now, Pa?" she asked, dread settling in her stomach like a stone. "Made a deal with Solomon Jenkins, that's what. He's agreed to clear all my debts, every last cent." He waved the paper triumphantly. "And what did you promise him in return?" Lillian's knuckles went white against the wooden spoon she gripped. Her father's gaze slid away from hers, focusing instead on the flickering flames in the hearth. "It's only temporary, Lily, just a year of service to pay off what I owe." The spoon clattered to the floor. "Service? What kind of service?" When he finally looked at her, she knew. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "You didn't. It's signed and legal. You'll work at his saloon to pay off my debt. It's $1,500, Lily. I'd never be able to pay that back otherwise. You sold me." Her voice was barely a whisper as the room began to spin around her. "Not sold. It's a contract of employment. 1 year and then you're free. 1 year to save everything we've worked for, everything they'd worked for." The irony wasn't lost on Lillian. She had been the one working, taking in laundry and mending, selling eggs from their few chickens while he gambled away their savings. "When?" was all she could manage to ask. "Tomorrow morning. Jenkins is sending someone to collect you." Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. That night, Lillian didn't sleep. She packed her few belongings in a small cloth bag and sat by the window, watching as the stars faded and dawn crept across the sky. She wondered briefly about running, but knew it would only make things worse. Jenkins would find her, and her father would likely pay with his life for her disobedience. The sound of approaching hooves just after sunrise made her heart race. She expected to see Solomon Jenkins, the aging saloon owner whose reputation for cruelty was well known throughout Pendleton. Instead, a tall stranger dismounted from a chestnut stallion. His black hat cast a shadow over his features, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with stubble. Her father was already outside, shaking hands with the man, passing over the contract. Lillian gathered her courage and stepped out into the morning light. "This is her, then." The stranger's voice was deep, with a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "This is my daughter, Lillian," her father confirmed, glancing nervously between them. The stranger finally looked at her directly, and Lillian was struck by eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Patrick Vance," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I'll be escorting you to Wildwood." "Wildwood?" Lillian looked questioningly at her father. "I thought I was to work at Jenkins' saloon here in Pendleton." Her father shuffled uncomfortably. "Jenkins has interests in several establishments. His main business is in Wildwood, about 2 days' ride from here." The betrayal stung anew. Not only had he sold her into servitude, but he was sending her away, far from everything and everyone she knew. "We should get moving if we want to make good time," Patrick Vance said, seemingly oblivious to the tension. Lillian turned to her father, searching his face for any sign of remorse. "Is this truly what you want? To never see your daughter again?" "It's just a year, Lily," he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. She walked past him without another word, approaching the tall stranger and his horse. Patrick Vance helped her mount, his touch impersonal but gentle, then swung up behind her. "Wait," her father called, stepping forward with reddened eyes. "Take care of her, Vance. She's all I have left." Patrick nodded once, then clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward. Lillian didn't look back as they rode away from the only home she had ever known. They rode in silence for the first hour, Lillian rigid with anger and fear, acutely aware of the stranger at her back. When they reached a small stream, Patrick reined in his horse. "We'll rest here for a bit," he announced, dismounting and offering his hand to help her down. Lillian ignored it, sliding awkwardly from the saddle on her own. Her legs nearly buckled after the unaccustomed ride, but she steadied herself against the horse. "You should drink and stretch your legs," Patrick advised, leading his horse to the stream. "It's a long journey to Wildwood." "Why did Jenkins send you instead of coming himself?" she asked, finally breaking her silence. Patrick filled his canteen before answering. "Jenkins doesn't leave Wildwood much these days. His gout makes traveling difficult." He paused, then added, "And I had business in Pendleton anyway." "What kind of business?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The kind that doesn't concern young ladies." Lillian bristled at his dismissive tone. "I think I've earned the right to ask questions about the man taking me to a life of servitude." Patrick's expression sobered. "Fair enough. I was collecting on some debts owed to Jenkins, your father's among them." "And what exactly will my duties be at this saloon?" She tried to keep her voice steady, but fear crept in at the edges. "That's between you and Jenkins," he replied, but something in his tone had changed. "Come on, we should keep moving." They continued their journey, stopping only briefly for a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. As the day wore on, Lillian's anger gave way to exhaustion, and she found herself leaning back against Patrick's solid chest to stay upright in the saddle. "We'll make camp soon," he said, his voice rumbling against her back. "There's a good spot about a mile ahead." The good spot turned out to be a small clearing near another stream, sheltered by a stand of pines. Patrick efficiently set up camp, gathering wood for a fire and unsaddling his horse. Lillian stood awkwardly to one side, unsure of her role. "You can gather some of those pine needles," he suggested, nodding toward the trees. "They'll make the ground softer for sleeping." She worked silently, grateful for the task. When the fire was crackling and a simple stew was bubbling in a small pot, Patrick sat across from her, the flames illuminating his face. "Why did you agree to transport me?" Lillian asked suddenly. "Surely Jenkins has other men who could have done it." Patrick stirred the stew thoughtfully. "I owed him a favor." "What kind of favor requires you to deliver a woman to his saloon?" She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. He looked up sharply. "It's not what you're thinking. Jenkins is many things, but he doesn't force women into that kind of work." "Then what am I to do there?" "Cook, clean, serve drinks. The usual tasks of a saloon girl." He ladled stew into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Lillian accepted the cup but didn't touch the food. "And if I refuse, then Jenkins will find other ways to collect what's owed." "Likely by taking your father's land, possibly by other means." Patrick's gaze was steady. "Your father made a poor choice, but he believed he was protecting you. By selling me, by ensuring the debt couldn't be collected in a more permanent way." Patrick's voice was grim. "Jenkins isn't known for his mercy toward those who can't pay." Lillian finally tasted the stew, surprised to find it flavorful despite its simplicity. They ate in silence, the crackling fire and night sounds of the forest the only accompaniment. As she was spreading her blanket on the pine needles, Patrick spoke again. "I'll sleep on the other side of the fire. You have nothing to fear from me, Miss Russell." His formal address surprised her. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Lillian. She lay watching the stars through the pine branches, wondering what awaited her in Wildwood. Across the fire, Patrick's breathing had evened out, but she sensed he wasn't truly asleep either. "Mr. Vance," she ventured quietly. "Yes." His response was immediate, confirming her suspicion. "Have you known Jenkins long?" There was a pause before he answered. "Long enough to know what he's capable of, and yet you work for him." "I work for myself," he corrected. "Jenkins is a business associate, nothing more." "What business are you in, Mr. Vance?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm a gambler, Miss Russell." The irony wasn't lost on her. "Like my father, then?" "No," he said firmly. "Not like your father. I don't bet what I can't afford to lose." Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the pines as Lillian woke to the smell of coffee. Patrick was already up, tending to his horse and preparing a simple breakfast. "We should reach Hawkins Creek by nightfall," he informed her as they ate. "There's a decent inn where we can stay." The prospect of a proper bed was appealing, but Lillian couldn't help wondering how many more nights of freedom she had before reaching Wildwood. How much farther to Wildwood after that? Half a day's ride. "We'll arrive by noon tomorrow." They set out again, the rhythm of the horse's gait becoming almost soothing. Lillian found herself asking questions about the landscape, the towns they passed, anything to keep her mind off what awaited her. To her surprise, Patrick was knowledgeable and forthcoming, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of history about the region. His voice took on a different quality when he spoke of the land, reverent, almost tender. "You know this area well," she observed. "I grew up not far from here," he admitted. "My father ran cattle on a spread about 20 miles east of Wildwood. And now you're a gambler," she mused. "That's quite a change." Something darkened in his expression. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect, Miss Russell." They reached Hawkins Creek as the sun was setting, the small town bustling with activity despite the hour. The Stagecoach Inn stood at the center of town, a 2-story building with a wide porch and warm light spilling from its windows. Patrick secured them rooms, separate ones, to Lillian's relief, and suggested they meet for dinner in the dining room. Alone in her small but clean room, Lillian took the opportunity to wash away the dust of travel and change into her one good dress. She braided her chestnut hair and pinched some color into her pale cheeks, determined to face whatever came with dignity. The dining room was crowded but not uncomfortable, filled with travelers and locals alike. Patrick stood when she approached their table, pulling out her chair with unexpected courtesy. "You look refreshed," he commented as she sat. It wasn't quite a compliment, but his gaze lingered on her face longer than strictly necessary. Dinner was simple fare: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, but after days of trail food, it seemed like a feast. Patrick ordered wine, surprising Lillian again with his consideration. "To fortify you for tomorrow," he explained, pouring her a modest glass. The wine loosened her tongue, and she found herself asking more personal questions. "Do you have family in Wildwood, Mr. Vance?" He shook his head. "My parents are gone. I have a sister in San Francisco, but we don't correspond much." "That sounds lonely." A fleeting smile crossed his face. "I'm used to my own company, Miss Russell, and my profession doesn't lend itself to deep attachments. Because you move around so much, that and people tend to dislike losing their money to me." His tone was light, but there was an edge to it. "Are you very good, then, at gambling?" She was genuinely curious. "Good enough to make a living." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "Good enough to know when to walk away from a bad bet." Something in his expression made her heart beat faster. She looked down at her plate, suddenly self-conscious. "I should retire." "Tomorrow will be difficult," Patrick nodded, standing as she rose. "I'll escort you to your room." At her door, he hesitated, seeming to struggle with something he wanted to say. Finally, he simply bid her good night, his hand brushing hers briefly as he turned to go. Lillian slept fitfully, dreaming of endless rides and faceless men. She woke before dawn, dressing quickly in the dim light. When she went downstairs, Patrick was already there, 2 steaming cups of coffee on the table before him. "You're early," he observed, pushing 1 cup toward her. "I couldn't sleep." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "What happens when we reach Wildwood?" Patrick's gaze was direct. "I deliver you to Jenkins along with the contract. He explains your duties and I collect my fee. And then you leave." She hadn't meant to sound so dismayed. "And then I leave," he confirmed, his expression unreadable. "Unless there's a game worth staying for." They set out as the sun was rising, the road to Wildwood winding through increasingly rugged terrain. Lillian was quiet, lost in her thoughts and fears about what awaited her. Patrick seemed to respect her need for silence, speaking only to point out a hawk circling overhead or to ask if she needed to rest. As they crested a hill around midday, a town came into view in the valley below. Wildwood was larger than Lillian had expected, with several streets of buildings and what looked like a small rail yard at its edge. "That's it?" she asked, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. "That's it," Patrick confirmed. "The Silver Dollar Jenkins place is on the main street." As they rode into town, Lillian felt eyes on them. Women paused in their shopping to watch them pass. Men nodded respectfully to Patrick. It was clear he was known here, and the realization both comforted and concerned her. The Silver Dollar Saloon was an imposing 2-story building with a freshly painted facade and large windows. A hitching post out front was already occupied by several horses, suggesting business was good even at this early hour. Patrick dismounted and helped Lillian down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though she felt anything but ready. Taking a deep breath, she followed him through the batwing doors into the saloon. The interior was dimly lit, but surprisingly clean, with a long bar along one wall and tables scattered throughout. A staircase at the back led to what Lillian assumed were rooms upstairs. A few men were drinking at the bar, and a woman in a red dress was sweeping the floor. "Patrick Vance." A booming voice drew their attention to a man emerging from a back room. Solomon Jenkins was in his 50s, heavyset with a florid complexion and elaborately waxed mustache. He walked with a slight limp, confirming what Patrick had said about his gout. Right on time, as always. Jenkins' gaze shifted to Lillian, assessing her from head to toe. "And this must be Charles Russell's girl, prettier than I expected." Lillian straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "Mr. Jenkins." "She's got spirit, too," Jenkins chuckled. "Come to my office, both of you. We have business to discuss." The office was cluttered but organized, with ledgers stacked neatly on a massive desk and a wall safe partially visible behind a painting. Jenkins lowered himself into a leather chair with a grunt of discomfort. "The contract, if you please," he said, holding out a hand to Patrick. Patrick reached into his jacket and withdrew the document but didn't immediately hand it over. "Before we conclude our business, I have a proposition." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Oh, a game. One hand of poker." "If I win, Miss Russell's contract is void." Lillian's heart stopped. She stared at Patrick, unable to believe what she was hearing. Jenkins laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "And if you lose?" "If I lose, I pay her father's debt in full and you still get a year of Miss Russell's service." "Patrick, no," Lillian began, but he silenced her with a look. Jenkins considered the offer, stroking his mustache. "You must want something in return." "Just the satisfaction of a good game," Patrick replied evenly. Bullshit, Jenkins snorted, but I'm curious enough to play along. One hand high card wins, Patrick shook his head. 5-card draw, nothing wild. Fine. Jenkins opened a drawer and withdrew a deck of cards. Shuffle if you want. Patrick took the deck, his hands moving with practiced ease as he shuffled. The cards seemed to flow between his fingers, almost as if they were extensions of his hands. He dealt 5 cards to Jenkins and 5 to himself, then set the deck aside. The room was silent as both men examined their hands. Lillian held her breath, her future hanging in the balance of this single game. Jenkins discarded 2 cards and drew 2 more. Patrick discarded 3, his expression giving nothing away as he picked up his new cards. Let's see what you've got, Vance, Jenkins said, laying down his hand. 3 queens. Patrick's face remained impassive as he revealed his cards one by one. Straight flush. Jenkins' face darkened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. You cheated. No, Patrick said calmly. I just played better. The contract, Jenkins. For a moment, Lillian thought Jenkins might refuse, might call for his men to throw them out or worse. But then he laughed again, this time with grudging respect. You always were too damn lucky for your own good, Vance. He held out his hand for the contract, which Patrick gave him. With a flourish, Jenkins tore it in half, then in quarters. There. The girl is free and Russell's debt is forgiven. I trust that concludes our business, Patrick nodded, standing and extending his hand to Lillian. She took it, her mind spinning as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Outside, in the bright sunlight of the street, she finally found her voice. Why did you do that? You risked everything. Patrick led her to his horse, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. Let's get some distance from town, then we can talk. They rode in silence until Wildwood was well behind them, stopping at a small creek to water the horse and rest. Lillian watched as Patrick removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. You didn't answer my question, she reminded him. Why did you risk so much for me? Patrick met her gaze directly. Because what your father did wasn't right, and neither was Jenkins' acceptance of the arrangement. No person should be property, even temporarily. But you could have lost. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I wasn't going to lose. How can you be so sure? He hesitated, then reached into his boot and withdrew a playing card, an ace of spades. Because I had this. Lillian stared at the card, then at him. You cheated. I ensured the outcome I wanted, he corrected. Jenkins would have done the same if he'd thought of it. She should have been outraged at the deception, but all she felt was relief and gratitude. Thank you, she said simply. Patrick tucked the card away. You're free now. You can return to your father or go wherever you choose. The reality of her situation suddenly hit Lillian. She was free, yes, but she had nowhere to go, no means to support herself. I can't go back to my father, not after what he did. Patrick nodded, understanding in his eyes. There's a town about 20 miles east of here, Silverton. It's growing with opportunities for someone willing to work. I could take you there. Why would you do that? You've already done more than enough. He looked away, focusing on his horse drinking from the creek. Let's just say I'm not quite ready to part ways with you, Miss Russell. The admission, simple as it was, sent a wave of warmth through Lillian. In that case, I accept your offer, Mr. Vance, and I think, given the circumstances, you might call me Lillian. His smile was genuine this time. Lillian it is, and I'm Patrick. They rode toward Silverton, the tension that had marked their previous journey replaced by a tentative camaraderie. Patrick told her more about his life, how he'd left his father's ranch at 18 to seek his fortune, how he'd discovered his talent for cards, and how he'd learned to navigate the often dangerous world of professional gambling. It's not the life my father wanted for me, he admitted as they made camp that evening. He wanted me to take over the ranch, marry a local girl, raise a family. Why didn't you? Lillian asked, watching him build the fire with practiced ease. Patrick was quiet for a long moment. My father was killed in a dispute over water rights when I was 16. By the time I was 18, the ranch was deeply in debt. I sold it to pay what was owed, and there wasn't much left after that. I'm sorry, Lillian said softly. That must have been difficult. He shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. Life goes on. What about you? What did you want before your father's gambling changed everything? Lillian thought about it as she helped prepare their simple meal. I wanted to teach. There was a school in Pendleton, and the teacher there, Miss Thompson, she let me help with the younger children sometimes. I loved it. Why didn't you pursue it? After my mother died, there was no one else to care for my father, and we needed the money I earned from taking in laundry and mending. She sighed. Dreams have a way of getting lost in necessity. Patrick's gaze was thoughtful as he passed her a plate of beans and salt pork. Silverton has a school. It's small but growing with the town. They might need a teacher's assistant. The possibility sent a flicker of hope through her. Do you think so? It's worth asking, he said with a smile. You've got determination, Lillian Russell. I think you'd make a fine teacher. They reached Silverton the following afternoon, a bustling town centered around a silver mine that had opened 2 years earlier. There was a hotel, several shops, a church, and as Patrick had mentioned, a small schoolhouse at the edge of town. We'll get you settled at the hotel first, Patrick decided, guiding his horse down the main street. Then we can inquire about opportunities. The Silverton Hotel was modest but clean, with a friendly proprietress who introduced herself as Mrs. Hattie Dawson. A room for the young lady, Patrick requested, placing coins on the counter. For a week to start. And for yourself, sir, Mrs. Dawson asked, eyeing them with undisguised curiosity. The same, but a separate room, he clarified quickly. Mrs. Dawson's expression softened slightly. Of course. Are you new to town? Just arrived, Lillian confirmed. I'm hoping to find work, possibly at the school if they need assistance. Well now, that's fortunate, Mrs. Dawson said, brightening. Miss Fletcher, our schoolteacher, just announced she's expecting and will need help, especially as her time approaches. You should speak with her tomorrow morning. Lillian could hardly believe her luck. I will, thank you. Once they were settled in their rooms across the hall from each other, Lillian noted with a mixture of propriety and disappointment Patrick suggested they explore the town. Silverton was indeed growing rapidly. Construction was underway on several new buildings, and the streets were busy with miners, merchants, and families going about their business. A sense of possibility seemed to permeate the air. They stopped at the general store, where Patrick insisted on purchasing a few necessities for Lillian's soap, hairpins, a new comb to replace the one she'd left behind in her hurried departure from home. I can't accept these, she protested, as he paid the shopkeeper. Consider it an investment in your future success, he countered with a wink that made her heart skip. Later, over dinner at the hotel's small dining room, they discussed her plans for approaching the schoolteacher the next day. Be confident, Patrick advised. You have experience with children and you're clearly intelligent. Miss Fletcher would be fortunate to have your assistance. Lillian smiled at his encouragement. Thank you for everything, Patrick. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Seeing you settled and happy will be payment enough. His gaze held hers across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had been growing since that first night around the campfire. The next morning, Lillian dressed with care in her best dress, her hair neatly braided and pinned. Patrick accompanied her to the schoolhouse, waiting outside while she went in to speak with Miss Fletcher. Sarah Fletcher was a young woman of perhaps 25, with a kind face and the beginnings of a maternal roundness beneath her dress. She listened attentively as Lillian explained her background and experience. "It seems Providence has sent you to us, Miss Russell," she said when Lillian had finished. "I've been praying for assistance, especially as my condition advances. The school board has approved hiring a helper, but finding someone suitable in a mining town is no easy task." "Then you're offering me the position?" Lillian asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am, provided the board approves after meeting you. They gather tonight at 7 at the church." "Could you attend?" "Of course," Lillian agreed readily. Outside, Patrick was waiting with barely contained anticipation. When she shared the news, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I knew she'd recognize your value," he said, taking her hands impulsively. The contact sent a shock of awareness through Lillian, and she found herself reluctant to let go. Patrick seemed equally affected, his smile faltering slightly as his gaze dropped to their joined hands, then back to her face. "We should celebrate," he suggested, his voice rougher than before. "There's a cafe down the street that Mrs. Dawson recommended." The day passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Patrick helped Lillian rehearse what she might say to the school board, offering encouragement and advice. His confidence in her was a balm to her still bruised spirit, healing wounds inflicted by her father's betrayal. By the time they walked to the church that evening, Lillian felt ready to face whatever questions the board might pose. Patrick squeezed her hand before she entered, the brief contact grounding her. "You'll do wonderfully," he assured her. "I'll wait right here." The school board consisted of 5 members, 3 men and 2 women, all prominent citizens of Silverton. Their questions were thorough but fair, focusing on Lillian's education and experience with children. When they asked about her reasons for coming to Silverton, she hesitated only briefly before deciding on honesty. "I needed a fresh start," she explained. "My father made some poor decisions that would have cost me my freedom if not for the intervention of a good man." Her candor seemed to impress them, and after a brief deliberation, the board chairman offered her the position, starting the following Monday. Patrick was waiting outside, his expression anxious until he saw her smile. "You got it," Lillian nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close. "I knew you could do it," he murmured against her hair. "I'm proud of you, Lillian." The embrace lasted longer than propriety dictated, but Lillian couldn't bring herself to care. In Patrick's arms, she felt safe for the first time since her father had shown her that contract. Eventually, they walked back to the hotel, discussing the details of her new position. The salary was modest but sufficient, especially with room and board included during the school term. "You'll need to find permanent lodging soon," Patrick noted as they reached the hotel. "Perhaps Mrs. Dawson knows of somewhere suitable." The reminder that her current arrangements and Patrick's presence were temporary dimmed Lillian's happiness. "Yes, I suppose I will." They paused at the foot of the stairs leading to their rooms. "What about you?" Lillian asked hesitantly. "Will you be moving on now that I'm settled?" Patrick's expression was difficult to read in the dim light of the hotel lobby. "I haven't decided yet. Silverton might have some opportunities worth exploring." The possibility that he might stay sent a flutter of hope through her. "I hope you find something that interests you here." His smile was slow and warm. "I already have." The days that followed took on a rhythm that was both novel and comforting. Lillian spent her mornings with Miss Fletcher, learning the curriculum and meeting the children she would soon be teaching. Afternoons were devoted to securing permanent lodgings, a small but comfortable room in a boarding house for respectable young women, and acquiring the necessities for her new life. Patrick was a constant presence, offering advice, assistance, and companionship. He seemed in no hurry to leave Silverton, though Lillian wasn't entirely sure what kept him there. He spent evenings at the Silver Spur saloon, presumably playing cards, but his days were devoted to her. A week after their arrival, as they walked back from the dress shop where Lillian had ordered 2 new work dresses, she finally gathered the courage to ask, "Don't you have business elsewhere? Surely there are more profitable games than those at the Silver Spur." Patrick was quiet for a moment, his stride slowing. "Are you eager to see me go, Lillian?" "No." The word burst from her with more force than she intended. More calmly, she added, "I just don't want you to stay out of some misplaced sense of obligation." He stopped walking entirely, turning to face her. "Is that what you think? That I'm staying out of obligation?" Lillian couldn't meet his intense gaze. "Why else would you remain in a small mining town when you could be in Denver or San Francisco?" Patrick's hand came up to cup her cheek, gently turning her face toward his. "Because the most valuable thing I've found in years is right here in Silverton." Her heart pounded as she finally understood what he was saying. "Patrick, I've never met anyone like you, Lillian," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "Your courage, your resilience, your kindness, despite everything that's happened to you, they humble me." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I'm nothing special." "You're everything," he contradicted softly. "And if you'll allow it, I'd like to court you properly. No contracts, no obligations, just a man and a woman getting to know each other." Joy bloomed in Lillian's chest, as bright and unexpected as a desert flower after rain. "I'd like that very much." His smile was brilliant as he offered her his arm to continue their walk. "Then we'll begin immediately, perhaps with dinner at the cafe this evening." "That sounds wonderful," she agreed, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow. The courtship that followed was both traditional and unique. Patrick respected the proprieties, always ensuring they were seen in public places and returning her to her boarding house at a respectable hour. But there was nothing conventional about their conversations, which ranged from philosophy to politics to their dreams for the future. Lillian learned that beneath Patrick's gambling exterior lay a thoughtful, educated man with a deep appreciation for literature and a surprising knowledge of history. He, in turn, discovered her quick wit and passionate opinions on education and women's rights. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Lillian thrived in her role at the school, earning the respect of both Miss Fletcher and the children. Patrick, to everyone's surprise including his own, accepted a position managing the town's only bank, a role that suited his mathematical mind and understanding of human nature. "It's respectable," he told Lillian with mock dismay one evening as they sat on the porch of her boarding house. "I'm not sure how I feel about that," she laughed, nudging his shoulder with hers. "You'll adapt. Besides, bankers need to understand odds and risks just as gamblers do." "True," he conceded. "And the hours are better. More time to spend with a certain school teacher." As the nights grew cooler, Patrick began to speak of their future. He talked of building a house, of putting down roots in Silverton, of creating something lasting. One crisp October evening, as they walked back from the Harvest Festival at the church, he led her to a vacant lot on a quiet street near the school. "What do you think of this spot?" he asked, gesturing to the cleared land. Lillian looked around, confused. "For what?" "A house," he clarified. "Our house, if you'll have me." Her breath caught as she realized what he was asking. "Patrick, are you?" Before she could finish, he was down on one knee before her, a small velvet box in his hand. "Lillian Russell, when I tore up that contract in Jenkins' office, I thought I was setting you free. I didn't realize I was binding myself to you in ways that no paper could ever capture." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks as joy overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes." Patrick slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words couldn't express. They were married 2 weeks later in the Silverton church, with Miss Fletcher as Lillian's maid of honor and the bank president as Patrick's best man. The entire town seemed to turn out for the celebration, welcoming the former gambler and the new teacher as one of their own. That night, in the small house they were renting until their own could be built, Lillian discovered yet another side of Patrick, tender, passionate, and utterly devoted to her pleasure. Their lovemaking was a revelation, a communion of bodies and souls that left them both breathless and amazed. "I never thought I could be this happy," Lillian murmured as they lay entwined afterward, her head pillowed on his chest. Patrick's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Nor I. You've changed everything, Lillian Vance." The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "So do I." Winter descended on Silverton with a ferocity that took Lillian by surprise. Heavy snow blanketed the town, turning the streets into tunnels between high drifts. School continued despite the weather, with Patrick insisting on escorting Lillian each morning despite her protests. "I won't have my wife lost in a snowdrift," he declared, wrapping her in the fur-lined cloak he'd gifted her for Christmas. Lillian had to admit, she enjoyed these morning walks, their breath mingling in the frosty air as they discussed their plans for the day. Patrick had become an integral part of the community, his financial acumen helping many of the miners and merchants weather the economic challenges of the winter months. Their own house was progressing slowly, hampered by the weather but taking shape nonetheless. Patrick often stopped by after work to check on the construction, sometimes bringing Lillian to see the latest developments. "This will be the parlor," he'd explain, gesturing to framed walls. "And through here, the kitchen. And upstairs," his eyes would take on a particular gleam that made her blush, "our bedroom, with plenty of room for a nursery beside it." The hint wasn't subtle, and truth be told, Lillian found herself hoping each month that they might have news to share. By February, her wish was granted. "Patrick," she said one evening as they sat before the fire in their rented home, her voice trembling slightly, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from his book, concern crossing his features at her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" Lillian shook her head, a smile blossoming. "Not unwell, just expecting." It took a moment for her meaning to register, then Patrick's book fell forgotten to the floor as he knelt before her chair, hands cradling her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe transforming his face. "We're having a baby." Lillian nodded, tears of happiness spilling over. "In August, the doctor thinks." Patrick gathered her into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you," he said fiercely. "Both of you." The news energized Patrick like nothing Lillian had seen before. He drove the builders mercilessly, determined that their house would be ready well before the baby arrived. He pored over catalogs, ordering furniture and baby items from as far away as Chicago. And he hovered over Lillian, watching her like a hawk for any sign of discomfort. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she reminded him repeatedly, though secretly she cherished his concern. "Humor me," he would reply, tucking a blanket around her or bringing her tea. Spring brought a renewed sense of possibility to Silverton. The snow melted, revealing muddy streets that gradually dried in the strengthening sun. Construction on their house resumed in earnest, and by May, Patrick was able to carry Lillian over the threshold of their completed home. It was everything they had dreamed, spacious but cozy, with a modern kitchen, a parlor perfect for entertaining, and upstairs, the master bedroom with its adjoining nursery, already furnished with a cradle Patrick had commissioned from the town's cabinet maker. As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, she cut back on her teaching duties, but continued to assist Miss Fletcher with lesson planning and grading. Patrick arranged his work schedule to be home with her as much as possible, often bringing paperwork to complete at their dining table rather than staying late at the bank. One evening in late June, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset, a familiar figure appeared on the road leading to their house. Lillian squinted, then gasped as recognition dawned. Pa. Charles Russell approached slowly, hat in hand, looking older and more worn than when Lillian had last seen him. Patrick tensed beside her, his arm tightening protectively around her shoulders. "Lillian," her father called, stopping at the gate, "I've been searching for you. How did you find me?" She asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Word gets around. Heard about a gambler who'd settled down with a schoolteacher in Silverton. Figured it might be the man who took you from Jenkins." His gaze shifted to Patrick. "Didn't know at the time he was saving you." Patrick stood, helping Lillian to her feet. Her advanced pregnancy was obvious now, and she saw her father's eyes widen at the sight. "You're with child," he said softly. "I am," she confirmed. "Your grandchild will arrive in August." Charles Russell's weathered face crumpled. "I don't deserve to be called grandfather, not after what I did." Lillian felt Patrick's supportive presence at her back, giving her strength. "Why are you here, Pa?" "To beg your forgiveness," he said simply. "I've been sober since you left, sold the homestead and paid off my debts. Been working honest labor, trying to become someone you wouldn't be ashamed to call father." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Lillian felt the hard knot of resentment she'd carried begin to loosen. "It won't be easy," she warned. "What you did was unforgivable," he finished for her. "I know that. I'm not asking for easy, just for a chance to make amends." Lillian looked up at Patrick, seeking his counsel. His expression was guarded but not hostile. "It's your decision," he told her quietly. "But if he's truly changed, perhaps our child deserves to know their grandfather." She nodded, then turned back to her father. "You can stay for supper," she offered. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The reunion was awkward at first, with Charles clearly uncomfortable in the fine home his daughter now occupied. But as the evening progressed, the conversation flowed more easily. Charles spoke of his work on a ranch near Pendleton, of his efforts to stay sober, of his regret for the years wasted in gambling and drinking. "I lost your mother to illness," he said at one point, his voice thick with emotion. "And then I nearly lost you to my own foolishness. I won't squander this third chance." By the time he left, accepting their invitation to stay in town and return the next day, Lillian felt a cautious optimism about the possibility of reconciliation. "He seems sincere," Patrick observed as they prepared for bed. "He does," Lillian agreed, her hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked energetically. "And I want our child to know their family, small as it is." Patrick gathered her close, his hand covering hers. "Our family isn't small," he corrected gently. "It's just beginning." Charles stayed in Silverton for a week, helping Patrick finish some landscaping around the house and getting to know his daughter again. When he left, it was with a promise to return before the baby's birth. True to his word, he arrived back in early August, just in time for the birth of his grandson Charles Patrick Vance, named for both his grandfathers. The birth was difficult but ultimately triumphant, with Lillian emerging exhausted but radiant, and Patrick more in love with his wife than ever before. "He's perfect," Patrick whispered, cradling his son with a mixture of awe and terror, just like his mother. The baby Charlie, as they came to call him, thrived under the adoring attention of his parents and grandfather. Charles Sr. proved to be a devoted grandfather, telling the infant stories of his grandmother and promising to teach him to ride as soon as he was old enough. When Charlie was 6 months old, Patrick came home with unexpected news. "I've been offered a position with the Denver National Bank," he announced over dinner. "Senior loan officer. It would mean moving, but the salary is considerably higher, and there are excellent schools for Charlie when he's older." Lillian considered the prospect. Silverton had become home, but Denver offered opportunities they couldn't ignore. "What about my father?" "He could come with us if he wants," Patrick suggested. "There's work in Denver for a man with ranch experience." Charles, who had taken a room at the boarding house but spent most evenings with them, looked surprised but pleased at the invitation. "I'd like that," he admitted. "If you're sure you want an old man underfoot." "Your family," Patrick said simply, "and family stays together." The move to Denver took place in the spring of 1881, when Charlie was 9 months old and beginning to crawl with determined enthusiasm. Their new home was larger than the Silverton house, with a garden where Lillian could grow flowers and vegetables, and close enough to the bank that Patrick could come home for lunch most days. Charles found work managing a livery stable, a position that suited his knowledge of horses and allowed him to be near his family. He remained sober, becoming a respected member of their church congregation and a favorite among the neighborhood children for his storytelling abilities. Patrick thrived at the bank, his understanding of risk and reward serving him well in evaluating loan applications. He maintained a small table in his study where he occasionally played cards with friends, but never for more than token stakes. "The biggest gamble I ever took was tearing up that contract," he told Lillian on their second wedding anniversary. "And it paid the greatest dividend." Lillian eventually returned to teaching, accepting a position at a private girls' academy once Charlie was in school himself. Her progressive ideas on education earned her the respect of both colleagues and students, and by 1885, she was appointed headmistress of the junior division. That same year, she gave birth to their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Patrick's mother. Unlike her brother's difficult delivery, Eliza's birth was swift and relatively easy, bringing renewed joy to their growing family. As the children grew, so did the legend of how their parents had met. The story of the gambler who won a lady's freedom with a straight flush became a favorite bedtime tale, though Patrick and Lillian carefully edited the details until the children were old enough to understand the full complexity of the situation. "Did you really cheat to save Mama?" 10-year-old Charlie asked one evening, his eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and concern for his father's morality. Patrick exchanged a glance with Lillian before answering honestly. "I did. It wasn't honorable, but sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules." "I think it was brave," 7-year-old Eliza declared loyally. "Like a knight rescuing a princess." "Your father is certainly my knight," Lillian agreed, her hand finding Patrick's across the table. "And I've never regretted being rescued." Charles lived with them until his peaceful passing in the winter of 1888, having known the joy of watching his grandchildren grow and secure in the knowledge that he had made amends for his greatest mistake. They buried him in Denver's cemetery beneath a headstone that reads simply, "Beloved father and grandfather, redeemed by love." The years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Charlie followed in his father's footsteps, showing an aptitude for finance that led him to Harvard and eventually back to Denver as a banker in his own right. Eliza, to everyone's astonishment except perhaps her father's, became one of Colorado's first female attorneys, specializing in contracts and property law. Appropriate, wouldn't you say? Patrick mused to Lillian at Eliza's graduation from law school in 1906. Given how our story began. Very, Lillian agreed, her hair now streaked with silver but her eyes as bright as ever. Though I prefer how it's continuing. Their continuing story included grandchildren, 6 in all, 3 from each of their children, and a retirement filled with travel, reading, and community service. Patrick never entirely gave up cards, hosting a weekly poker game for charity at their church that became legendary for both the quality of play and the stories told around the table. In 1912, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought friends and family from across the country. Charlie, now married with 3 children of his own, raised a toast to his parents that brought tears to every eye. To the gambler who knew when to hold, when to fold, and when to tear up a contract, he said, raising his glass. And to the lady who taught him that love is the greatest bet of all. Patrick, his dark hair now silver but his eyes still that same storm cloud gray, pulled Lillian close. "I'd make the same wager again," he whispered against her hair. "Every time." Lillian turned her face up to his, the lines around her eyes crinkling as she smiled. "So would I, my love, so would I. In a world built on chance and circumstance, they had beaten the odds." A desperate gamble in a saloon office had led to a lifetime of love, proving that sometimes the riskiest bets yield the most precious rewards. From contract to commitment, from obligation to devotion, their journey had transformed them both, creating a legacy of courage, redemption, and abiding love that would endure long after the final card was played.